In the quiet, tree-lined suburbs of Cicero, Illinois, there lived a man who looked like any other aging grandfather. He was often seen tending to his garden or wearing modest, unassuming clothes. To the neighbors, he was just Joseph Ayepa, but in the underworld, he was Joey Doves, the iron-fisted boss of the Chicago outfit, a man who controlled the neon-lit destiny of Las Vegas from a basement thousands of miles away. While names like Al Capone and Sam Giancana captured the headlines with their flamboyance, Ayepa was the silent architect of the mafia's most profitable era. He proved that the deadliest power doesn't scream, it whispers, and when it decides you are no longer useful, you simply vanish into a Kansas cornfield. This is the true story of the man who turned the American dream into a private piggy bank for the mob. The story of Joseph Ayepa begins not with a bang, but with a slow, methodical climb through the ranks of the most disciplined criminal organization in American history. Born in 1907, Ayepa was a product of the Prohibition era, a time when the Chicago outfit was transitioning from a street gang into a corporate entity under Al Capone. Unlike the impulsive gangsters of his youth, Ayepa was a student of the old men, Paul Ricca and Tony Accardo. These mentors taught him the most valuable lesson in organized crime: visibility is a liability. Ayepa started as an enforcer and a button man, operating gambling dens in the Chicago suburbs. He was a man of few words and absolute loyalty, traits that allowed him to survive decades of internal purges and federal heat. One of the most peculiar chapters of his life, and the one that gave him his famous nickname, occurred in 1962. Ayepa was an avid outdoorsman, but even his hobbies had a criminal edge. He was caught by federal agents transporting 563 frozen mourning doves across state lines, well over the legal limit. This bizarre incident earned him the name Joey Doves. To the public, it was a joke, a quirky headline about a mobster with too many birds. But to those within the outfit, it was a reminder of Ayepa's nature. He took what he wanted, in whatever quantity he desired, and he didn't care for the rules of men or nature.
By the early 1970s, the landscape of the Chicago outfit was shifting. The flashy, celebrity-chasing boss Sam Giancana had become a magnet for the FBI, and the old guard had grown tired of his ego. When Giancana was eventually pushed out and later murdered in his own basement, the mantle of power fell to Ayepa. He became the boss of the outfit in 1971, but he did not lead with Giancana's flair. Ayepa was a ghost. He operated out of a modest house, avoided the press, and demanded a level of discipline that the Chicago mob hadn't seen in years. Under his leadership, the outfit reached the peak of its financial power, primarily through a sophisticated skimming operation in Las Vegas. The Vegas operation was the crown jewel of Ayepa's reign. During the 70s and early 80s, the Chicago outfit, along with families from Kansas City, Milwaukee, and Cleveland, effectively controlled several major casinos, including the Stardust, the Fremont, and the Hacienda. The beauty of the scam was its simplicity and its scale. Using the Teamsters Union pension fund as a private bank, the mob would provide loans to frontmen to buy the casinos. In exchange, the mob would skim cash directly from the counting rooms before it was ever recorded for tax purposes. Every month, suitcases filled with hundreds of thousands of dollars in untraceable cash were driven from the desert of Nevada to the suburbs of Chicago. Ayepa sat at the top of this pyramid, ensuring that the flow of money was steady and that anyone who threatened the secret was dealt with permanently. However, managing an empire from a distance required a street boss in Las Vegas, and Ayepa chose Anthony the Ant Spilotro. Spilotro was the polar opposite of Ayepa, violent, erratic, and hungry for the spotlight. While Ayepa wanted Las Vegas to be a quiet, efficient ATM, Spilotro turned it into a war zone of high-profile murders and blatant thefts. The tension between the two men represented the clash between the old-school philosophy of business first and the new-school hunger for notoriety. For years, Ayepa tolerated Spilotro's heat because the money was too good to stop. But as the 1980s dawned, the FBI's Operation Strawman began to dismantle the walls Ayupa had built. The downfall began not with a betrayal, but with the relentless persistence of federal investigators who used electronic surveillance to bug the meeting places of mob bosses across the Midwest. They captured conversations that detailed exactly how the skim worked and who was receiving the suitcases of cash. In 1986, the hammer finally fell. Ayupa, along with several other high-ranking mob figures, was indicted for his role in the multi-million-dollar skimming operation. The trial was a media sensation, though Ayupa remained characteristically silent throughout, his face a mask of cold indifference. At the age of 78, the man who had ruled Chicago with a whisper was sentenced to 28 years in federal prison. The conviction was a death sentence for a man of his age, but Ayupa had one final piece of business to settle before he disappeared behind bars. He blamed Tony Spilatro for the heat that had brought down the leadership. In Ayupa's world, failure was not just a disappointment, it was a capital offense. In June 1986, shortly after the sentencing, Tony Spilatro and his brother Michael were called to a meeting in a basement in Illinois, believing Tony was going to be promoted. Instead, they were brutally beaten to death. Their bodies were found days later, buried in a cornfield in Enos, Indiana. It was Ayupa's final message to the underworld. Even from a prison cell, the reach of the boss was absolute. Joseph Ayupa spent the next decade in a federal medical facility. The empire he had built began to wither without his firm hand. The casinos were sold to legitimate corporations, the Teamsters Fund was cleaned up, and the era of the old guard mobster was replaced by a new, more fragmented criminal landscape. When Ayupa was finally released due to failing health in 1996, he returned to the Chicago area, a shadow of the man who once decided the fate of the Las Vegas Strip. He died of natural causes in 1997 at the age of 89. Ayupa's legacy is one of terrifying efficiency. He wasn't a man who sought fame or wanted his name in the movies. He was a man who understood that true power is the ability to control the world while remaining invisible to it. He was the last of the great Western bosses who could command an army with a nod of his head. His life serves as a grim reminder of a time when the American underworld was as organized and disciplined as any Fortune 500 company, run by a man who loved hunting birds almost as much as he loved the silence of a well-executed plan.